So once again, good morning. So today we are going to talk on a topic of variability in concrete strength and what sort of factors actually affect the concrete strength performance. This is important because nowadays we, uh, in fact, most of our structures are RCC structures, and concrete has become more and more important with high grades coming up, cements which are giving higher early strengths, a lot of supplementary cementitious materials coming in, and entire what you say the life of structure, or rather I should say the durability is also important based on the concrete. But strength is something which we measure in immediate basis, which is something around 28 days time. So there's still a lot of factors and variables which actually come into the strength part. We'll just be going in those. I'll just start this session. So this is a line from an examination of issues in concrete practice, which was written by Mr. Adam Neville, who is often called as father of modern concrete, and it was published in ACI International. What he had written there is still of relevance today, maybe some 15, 20 years back or even more. There is more to concrete than its components. What is of interest is not the mix designed by a computer or made in the laboratory, but concrete in the actual structure. The factors affecting the quality of that concrete are not limited to mixed proportions, but they also include the quality of mixing, transport, placing, compaction, finishing, and curing. Each of these deserves careful consideration. In reality, this is not always the case. We also often find in a construction sites or wherever we have seen that we often, even the specifiers or the approvers, they tend to give more focus on the raw materials and the mix design and who has designed that, which laboratory has certified it, and all these sort of things. But many times these very, very important things are missed. It is just like watching a cookery show and trying to do something at home to match that particular food taste or whatever. But if the cook is not good, then ultimately the dish will not be right. So all of these actually, while producing the concrete and handling of concrete, play an important part on how the concrete would perform. But often than not, we often find that this is really not taken into much account. Today we are basically going into the different tests, what factors affect, what we need to check as engineers on site to ensure that whatever testing results we are going to get are correct as per the requirement, or at least as close to whatever the standard testing methods are. This is required because the structural designer would ultimately certify the structure on basis on the concrete performance. Of course, the enforcement is a part, but ultimately whether the concrete grade has met the requirement or not, that would definitely be looked into, because ultimately the dead loads and the live loads of the structure have to be taken by the RCC component, and if it has to comply with the requirement. Whenever we test, there are a lot of tests. Some of them are like site test, basically destructive tests, but not on the actual in situ concrete, but on the sample concrete, like our cube specimens which we test in the laboratory. If they and we are expected that to means like believe on those results, that whatever results they are giving are sort of indicative of the concrete in the structure. Of course, there would be tolerances. IS has accepted those, and that is also fairly given in the IS 456 standard. But whenever we also go for some destructive tests on site and some non-destructive tests on in situ concrete, so there would be always some variables. So we'll be going into those as well. We'll also go into the assumptions made while concrete mix design. This is just a basic. We'll just recap what characteristic strength actually means. Then the different methods of tests on concrete, the acceptance criteria, what is to be considered as acceptable, what is to be considered as not acceptable. There have been few revisions of Indian standards which have lately come. IS 1199 and 516 have both been revised, and there are some revisions to some of the old clauses which were there in the 1959 standard. So we'll be going through those as well. And also the contributors, as we go along through the test, we'll be going through the contributors of variation in the results. So please do ask any questions so that I'll be able to if I am able to answer, I'll surely answer those at the end of the session. So first of all, the characteristic strength. Sometimes even the characteristic strength is misunderstood when we are doing construction on sites. Now, characteristic strength is not something which will always achieve 100% results over the specified strength, but it is there is a statistical probability which is involved, and characteristic strength is defined as the strength of material below which not more than 5% of the test results are expected to fall. So characteristic strength also is defined that there may be a possibility that 5% of the results may actually not meet the requirement or may not meet the specified strength. So we have this table is, of course, is taken from IS 1343 because the definition is not very clearly given anywhere in IS 456. So IS 1343 is for the pre-stressed concrete. So we are I've just taken this from there. And grade of concrete, of course, the table remains the same. Of course, we'll be having classification of high grade, medium grade, and low grade in IS 456. Otherwise, the specified characteristic strength of concrete remains the same. So if you are talking about 55 MPa concrete or M50 grade concrete, 50 MPa concrete, if the characteristic strength is 50 MPa, still there is a probability that 5% of the results may actually fall below the 55 MPa requirement. And that is something which is considered when defining the strength itself. Now, whenever we are doing the design, we obviously do the designs in the laboratory. And laboratory, we often have raise or keep a higher target so that whatever variations do come in the field will actually ensure that the concrete meets the characteristic strength requirement. So since everything is defined on 95%, we take the factor of 1.65. We have a formula called target strength Ft is equal to FCK plus K into SD. So this K is dependent on what percentage of probability you're looking for. So if it is 95%, we take 1.65. If we want a higher consistency, we'll probably take 1 in 100. So which is just 1%. What we are taking is 1 in 20, like 1 in 20 samples may actually give you lesser than the specified strength. So this is like 5%. That's why the 95% clause. So if you want higher accuracy, then you go for a higher target strength. Of course, this table has been taken from IS 10262 1982, or this is also available in SP 23. This table is not subsequently available in the latest guidelines for concrete mix proportioning. American standards, of course, their design is based on 90%, so their target strengths are different from what our target strengths would be. So we typically do it on 95%, so that's why our target strength is calculated based on 1.65. So please remember that there is no concrete which will be 100% foolproof. There will always be some results which may not meet the requirement. If you want 100% compliant concrete, then the K factor is infinity, which we of course cannot multiply. So even there we have got 99% as the maximum and the 2.33. So your target strength will vary. If the target strength varies, your cement content would also likely, your cementitious content would also likely vary. So there's always a relation between the mixed design, how rich and mixed design you want, how much cost you can, and since IS specifies 95% as the definition, we go as per 1.65. There's also one thing which I have come across whenever we have had some discussions in the past is the applicability of target strength. Target strength is only applicable when you are approving the mixed design in the laboratory. Whenever you are judging the field performance, you have to check whether it is meeting the acceptance criteria as specified in IS 456. We never check the results to meet the target strength in the field. So it is just like that. If somebody wants to score like 100% marks, he would probably study for 110% or 120%, so that at least in all probability he will score close to 100% or 100%. So that is the way, a similar way the concrete mix design is done. So what should be the, whether meeting just the FCK is the requirement as per IS 456, or there is some higher requirement or some lower tolerance also given. So that also we will see, and what really affects the results. So it is something which we are going to see in somewhat detail. So this is the acceptance criteria as given by IS 456 in the original IS 456. Of course, this has been corrected in the Amendment 3, which came out in 2007. So there they had specified that whenever you are talking about concrete results in field, you have to take 4 non-overlapping. So if you have got 8 samples of the same supply, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you have to take a mean of 4 non-overlapping. The next set would be these 4, and collectively they should meet FCK plus 3 MPa. Now this 3 MPa is actually from Amendment 3, which came up in 2007. Here it is mentioned as FCK plus 4 for RCC. PCC, of course, it used to be FCK plus 3 earlier as well. If you also have a established standard deviation, so it is FCK plus 0.825 into SD. So it all depends on what your standard deviation you are getting and how you're monitoring. Whichever is higher, you need to take that as an acceptance criteria. So FCK plus 3 means if you are actually having an M70 concrete or M60, we'll take an example of M60. Your average results of 4 consecutive sets should come to 63 MPa minimum. IS also allows an individual result to be as low as FCK minus 3, provided the average is still meeting the average of 4 sets is still meeting this particular requirement. So this has been revised. Now again, we cannot select 2 overlapping samples. So that's what is very clear, non-overlapping consecutive test results. So this is the amendment which came. So they have corrected this FCK plus 4 to FCK plus 3 and individual to FCK minus 3 from FCK minus 4. So we'll now actually go into the factors influencing concrete strength. Now, most of the times whenever we are talking about concrete, right from the initial stage, it starts from the raw material, your raw required performance, and that is something which we'll just be going through one of the raw materials as such later in the presentation, and we'll see how much variation is there even in a very critical part. If your raw material varies, you cannot be expected to have a consistent concrete quality. Then batching, mixing, transporting, all of these are very important. Say for example, batching. We are nowadays mostly dependent on ready mix concrete plants, and ready mix concrete plants, there is a specification even by the manufacturers as to how much time you should actually mix the concrete. Also there is a specification of how much tolerance will be there in the materials which are being batched. So whenever you are actually batching, your materials batch should be in tolerance, say which is plus or minus 2% for cementitious materials and plus or minus 3% for the other materials as said. Mixing is even more crucial with the sort of admixtures now we are having. PC admixtures probably take more time for mixing. The sequence of batching is also important. Many plants they actually have the admixtures getting batched directly into the concrete even before the water has been added to concrete cement, the aggregates and cement. So if the admixtures is added when the concrete is not even moist, it probably will be also absorbed into the fines in the aggregates and will not be that effective. So this is something which we have to look into. It also affects the concrete performance. Mixing, I have come across many places where the mixing time is reduced to 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 8 seconds, and it is sometimes at the mercy of the batcher as to how much mixing he actually does, which is the most crucial part of any concrete production. See, in our country, we have wet mix, which is being batched from ready mix. I'm specifically talking about ready mix. This also applies to the quality of mixing for concrete produced on site as well. So most of our transit mixers are really agitators. They are not mixers. And if you have a captive plant, there's hardly any mixing happening once the transit mixer leaves your plant and reaches the site. So you have to ensure that whatever mixing does happens very well in the mixer. So always see whether the mixing time is right or wrong. Transportation, of course, transportation is again a different subject with the controls sometimes to change depending on the site requirement. To some extent here, when we come to the field, we'll just discuss more on this. Sampling. Sampling, once you have got the concrete, sampling is quite important because sampling is something which will make, I have seen many people actually taking the samples in a very flat tray, which is sometimes used for plasters, and a very highly workable concrete being actually poured into this tray for collecting the samples. So if it is a highly workable concrete, it will actually spread. If it is segregating, the paste will go somewhere else and only aggregates will remain. So if you do that without proper mixing, if you cast the specimens, again your results will be different. So casting of specimens is equally important. The necessary amount of layers, the necessary amount of tamping or vibration to remove the air. Curing without allowing the hydration reaction to happen. If the moisture from the concrete evaporates, hydration will be affected. So the reaction will be affected, as such your strain gain will also be affected. So curing is very, I think, the most important apart from all these. Test process and equipment, they also play an important part in the consistency and correctness of the test results. So we'll come to those. In situ concrete, of course, raw materials are a part. Transportation is what we have discussed. Placing compaction is quite crucial. From what height you are placing, whether the concrete is really cohesive enough to be placed from large height, does it segregate? All of this will have an impact on how the concrete is placed into the structure. Mixed stability, the reason why I said was, if you have a very flowing concrete which has actually not been designed to be very stable, like for SCC we have got some requirements of how much should be the segregation resistance, what should be the viscosity of concrete, but no such requirements are present for normal concrete. So people try to make it as workable as possible so that the masons find it easy to pull the concrete at site. This is a new trend nowadays, that many people, they will not go for a normal strength. The specifiers will say that we want 150, 125 plus or minus 25 mm, but at the site people will not be willing to take any concrete which is not collapsed. So eventually somebody would add water to it, and the in situ strength will be significantly probably different from whatever is there in the concrete cubes. Curing is even more crucial. We often see that due to scarcity of water, the in situ members don't get the same attention as the cubes, and that will reflect if you have to actually take concrete course for assessing the in situ strength of concrete. And again, here test process and equipment, we'll come to the criticality of the equipment later on whenever we are doing in situ tests. So we'll just debate probably at the end which of these would truly be indicate. IS is very clear. If you want to check the conformity of the strength of concrete in structure, this is the right way, because this is the standardized manner in which the testing is to be done. Please note that whenever we are doing testing, any testing has to be done in a very standard manner, because if it is done in a non-standard manner, the test results would vary drastically. So if I'm testing, for example, IS has got different what you say sections or different codes. One is code of practice, title is code of practice. So which we typically have to follow. So code of practice is IS 456 or IS 800 or IS 1343 are examples of code of practice, where design also is considered as per that. Then there are specifications for materials. Now specifications of materials are something which are referred to in the code of practice. Now these specifications, I have to actually check whether the material or product is complying to the specifications. So I cannot test in a non-standard manner. So IS also has method of test given. So these are the standard method of test. And then comes the guidelines, which are maybe your reference documents. So currently the mixed proportioning standard is a guideline for concrete mixed proportioning. So there are different methods, different categories of codes. And here we are, whenever we are talking about conformity, we have to follow the code of practice and what it refers as the standard method of test for checking the conformity. So it IS 456 refers IS 516, which is basically testing of concrete specimens in a standard test environment, and that is there to assess the concrete strength. So that's where probably the acceptance criteria also comes into play. Sometimes the cube specimens don't actually give a right results. So structural designer has to confirm whether the concrete inside the structure is actually meeting the requirement or not. So this is something where we actually take the do the either the destructive or non-destructive testing on the in situ concrete samples. So there is always some variation in this. We'll just go and observe those in a bit detail later on. So just check for routine. These are the standards I'm just referring. For us, we have cubical specimens, so it is much more easier for us to have a right size specimen for testing. IS 516 1959 has been revised and a new code has come, IS 516 Part 1, Section 1 in 2021. So this is for test of cubical specimens. Of course, flexural strength is also given in the same standard, and even the split tensile now with a cubical specimen is also updated in this particular standard. We do not follow cylindrical specimens except for some projects where they are specified. So we're not going into detail with those. In situ, if these there are some contracts which actually even ask the contractor or the contractor to do routine compliant tests with cubes, also take out in situ course even if the cubes have passed. But most of the times the non-destructive testing or the destructive testing on in situ concrete is often done when your regular testing does not meet the requirement. So NDT typically is UPV, which we do. Now this came out in 2018, and rebound hammer test, which was still as per 1331 part 2, came out recently in part 5. So we'll just see what are the updates as compared to the previous standard. The new standards have thankfully even illustrated the type of failures which should be observed in the testing. So this the new standard for cube and even the core test actually has diagrams which show what you should observe while testing the course, because that is going the correctness of that test is going to reflect whatever measures you have to take on the concrete inside the structure. So we'll be going through those as well. So first comes raw material. Now raw materials, all of the raw materials, the consistency is very crucial, and they play an important part in ensuring the strength, performance, and durability of concrete. Now, this we currently, as of now, IS 456 is more of a prescriptive code where we have got the exposure conditions and the water cement ratios or the minimum grade of concrete to ascertain or to sort of design the concrete to meet a certain durability character. But strength is something which we measure in a very short term, in 28 days time, sometimes on projects of 56 days. So we'll be talking today specifically for strength. So we'll be focused on what really affects the concrete consistency. Cement is a very crucial factor, and in this particular session today, we'll focus on the variations which come out of these. And we have seen a lot of variations in cement also. Particularly these will affect your high strength concrete, since it is more prone to the variations in the strength, particularly M7, M80, M90. Those things will be very much dependent on the binder quality and consistency. SCMs, fly ash, GGBS, metacoline, microsilica, all of these also again need to be consistent. When you are taking fly ash has sort of become a commodity, and we buy fly ash from wherever it is getting supplied. And in some cases, we have also seen, of course, IS, there are two codes for it, 3812 and 3812 uh, part 1 and part 2. So this is specifically for pozzolanic metal, which is to be used in where fly ash is to be used in manufacture of cement, mortar, and concrete. Cement is left out of this standard, and this can be used as a the fly ash can be used as a mineral admixture for making manufacture of concrete and mortar. So there are two different requirements. This has to at this particular fineness of this fly ash is maximum about 34% retention on 45 micron. This is allowed up to 50% retention. Now, what is crucial here is the reactivity. See, just like we take an example of a grain of sugar. So if you have very, very finely ground sugar, it will dissolve quickly in water or tea or whatever you want to mix it with. If it is a coarse grained sugar grain, then it will take more time to dissolve. Similarly is the particle size. So the finer the particle size, it is expected that the better will be the reactivity, and coarser the particle, poorer will be the reactivity. But this reactivity also has to be measured. So whenever we are talking about fly ash as such, at least we have to check the lime reactivity. Now, why lime reactivity? We'll just see that. So lime reactivity, most of the test results which we often come across will have this particular thing omitted. So please ensure that this is actually available. This is done with a standard lime with 50 mm mortar cubes and 50 mm lime cubes, and the strength has to be at least 4.5 MPa. If it is reacting with lime, calcium hydroxide, that is uh, then it is actually going to be reactive for secondary hydration. Water, of course, all of these play a part on the strength as well as durability. We are not going to go into this. Particles, aggregates again, particle size, absorption values. Again, IS has specified that for any grade above 65 MPa, your impact value and crushing value should be more than 22%. So this is something which IS has specified recently in 383 2016, which we need to check. Many times we may not be able to get those aggregates. So again, this becomes a difficult exercise. Unconfined compressive strength also. If your concrete is say 90 and your aggregate is actually crushing at 40 MPa, then you have to put in a lot of efforts to make your paste much stronger so that concrete still gives strength. This particle size and absorption values also play an important part on the water demand and retention, and ultimately the practices later on to correct those can affect your concrete strength. So we'll specifically talk about cement here. I'll just share some of the third-party reports we have had done to understand the cement, because we observed some fluctuations in the concrete performance. So this is just a test report. Initial setting time of somewhere in 2020 is about 160 minutes, and final setting time is 255 minutes. So it gives us a fair amount of time with admixtures to get the necessary retention at site. Particularly if you are casting vertical elements, where if a tower crane is being used, you will require a lot of time if you have ordered large quantity of concrete in a transit mixer. And these were the results of concrete 32, 42, and 58.5. And not going into fineness as much, but these are meeting the requirements, and the concrete has been designed with whatever cement has been coming in this period. Now, when we check later, somewhere in the month of October, the setting time has suddenly dropped drastically. Initial setting time, in the final setting time has dropped. This was actually observed because the concrete was not giving the required retention. Oftentimes, what really happens, uh, the amount of gypsum and C3 in the cement will affect this, and sometimes it will make the admixture not to work or cause delayed setting also. So if your setting time is drastically reducing, then more often than not you may end up having more admixture or have to change the admixture to meet the requirement. But if it is not understood immediately, what really happens at site realistically is just people tend to add waters to tower crane buckets and calci columns, because redosing at site, some people don't even have measuring jars. Some ready mix uh, technicians who may come to site may not even have the measuring jars available with them to measure the right quantity of admixture. And it is always to be understood that it is not something that only admixture can be added to concrete. Some water has to be added to the admixture so that the admixture disperses into the concrete, whatever is remaining inside the transit mixer. So setting time has changed. This strength has also come down by about 5 MPa or 4 MPa, I should say. Not much actually, but still enough to affect your strength. Then again, a result in the month of February this year, setting time has increased drastically. Initial setting time from 165 minutes to 225 minutes, and final setting time to 310 minutes. This is just a plain cement setting time. When you have retarding superplasticizers added to concrete setting time is of course different. The testing method is also different, but that will be significantly higher. So again, the strength has come up, even the initial strength and things. So this is just one part of the story. We'll also go into the chemical analysis. So this is just a comparison of reports which we have seen. This is the MTC results, and this is the actual result received at site. So this was from October, which I just showed you. The LOI, I will not go into too much detail on this part, but higher the LOI, possibly you have to be more careful with the sort of results you may actually expect. Our limit is 4% in IS 269. February it was again higher. April this trend came down drastically. So if I am making a concrete which is of M80 and all that, a 6 to 7 MPa decrease is a fairly large decrease, which will even reflect on your concrete strength. So if you are producing concrete at site, please also understand that there would be variations in cement, and which we have to be proactive enough to counter and correct on time. The LOI and IR, insoluble residue values, loss on ignition and insoluble values, were also very, very high. Again in May, the cement is back to normal, I can say. So such sort of variations can occur, and we need to be careful and correct to whatever concrete we are producing, so that the end concrete results meets the requirement. So this was just about cement as such. The other things are also quite exhaustive, but we will it to take a lot of time to actually go into details of these things. A slump test is a very, very neglected test at site. Most of the times it is understood visually. Even sometimes the concentration is not done when approving the mixes on the way the slump test is visible. So it's a very basic test where you cast it in you fill the concrete in mold of 300 mm height, and in 3 layers. It has been revised to 3 layers in 2018 from 4 layers earlier. And when because of removal of confinement, the concrete will slump from a height. So that is basically measured. But how the concrete slumps also gives you an idea whether the concrete is cohesive or not. So if you get a concrete which is reflecting this type of appearance, then your mix is very, very cohesive. It is good for pumping. It would not segregate even when placing and compaction. So a slump test is even a decent indicator of whether your concrete is cohesive or not. If you are getting shear slump always, then your concrete is definitely not cohesive, and there is a likelihood that you may have face honeycombs because of separation of cement paste and aggregates. If your formwork is not good, if there are gaps, you will most of the time find honeycombs with shear slump concrete. Even it may so happen that if you're over vibrating the concrete, you may end up with a lot of latents and slurry on top and aggregate settling below, again creating a different concrete structure, not a homogeneous concrete structure. Collapse is also fine nowadays, as long as you don't see slurry which is spreading to the side and the curve is uniform, because this we most of the times nowadays even have concretes which may be close to 175 as long as it is a uniformly spread concrete without any separation of paste, it can be said to be okay. Now this is good enough for a concrete with normal slump or not slump concrete. But if it is going to be a flowable concrete, we can only check the flow of concrete. Most of the times we don't have any jairing at site to understand whether it is segregating, whether it has the required viscosity, whether it has got the required passing ability. We also do not have V-funnel on most site labs. So a simple test we can do after checking the flow is, first of all, observe the flow, see whether the flow is uniform in its height. If it is not uniform, there is a heap in the center, then your concrete doesn't have the required cohesiveness or the viscosity to pull the aggregates along with the paste. So this, if you are doing aluform concrete, if you are using tunnel formwork, or even if you are casting vertical members like retaining walls, there is very little you can do in concrete after the concrete has been placed. So all of these things need to be checked beforehand to ensure that the quality of concrete or homogeneity or uniformity of concrete in structure is there. Also, whenever you are sampling, you take the concrete in wheelbarrow, allow it to settle for about 5 minutes. If you see only cement paste on top or slurry, whatever it is, and aggregate settling below, making it very difficult to mix, you probably should not put the same concrete into your structure because that concrete is segregating a lot. Remember, SCC concrete is much more difficult to manufacture consistently. Much more controls are required to ensure correctness of moisture content, the correctness of fines in the grading. The required powder content would vary if the grading varies, and it is much difficult to consistently produce a SCC as compared to a normal concrete. So the simple wheelbarrow test would also indicate whether the concrete is actually segregating or not. This is an example of a proper cohesive concrete mix. Again, sampling. Sampling is also something which is sampling and cube specimen casting is important. If you have concrete which is ideally try to take concrete in a container, not on a flat tray, mix it thoroughly and cast it in 3 layers with 35 mm. That is of course for 150 mm size molds. Many times what happens, the tamping rod may not be there and people may use rib bars. So rib bars should not be used. Specific reason is when you are removing the rib bar again from concrete, these ribs will again disturb the concrete on these edges. So it is not a smooth, so it will create disturbance into concrete, and it is basically creating a issue completely opposite of what we actually wanted from tamping. So it is basically not at all compacting, but it is disturbing the concrete. Sometimes the uniformity of concrete layers, currently we are discussing about cubes, so uniformity in layers is also not there. So that has to be ensured. Sometimes people fill half and then fill remaining. Sometimes people actually end up consuming, take a little sample, end up consuming most of the concrete, and then try to fill in aggregates to make up for the top layer. If there is also sometimes a tendency that more aggregates will be more strength, but that is not the case. If you have got less binder or non-uniform content of binder, you will definitely have variability in the strength results. So right tamping and sampling is important. Now why IS 456, IS 516 rather, even 456 initially said that average of 3 values whenever you are casting a sample. A sample is basically 3 specimens, in which we actually take an average of the 3 cubes to ascertain whether the concrete is giving the required result. The average result is then compared with the acceptance criteria for individual sample, and then whether it is meeting or not, that is checked. IS 456 also, and even IS 516 1959 clearly said that if your average, if you have got 3 cubes, I'll just give an example. Concrete is 1 cube is 25 MPa, one is 30 MPa, and one is 20 MPa. So average is 25 MPa as such. If the lowest and the highest results are not within plus or minus 15% of the average strength, then IS 516 says repeat the test, and IS 456 says that you need to discard the result and of course repeat the test. The reason being, if from the same sample, if you are getting so much variation, then probably the sampling has not been representative, or the cube samples are not really representing the concrete uh, being cast in or pulled used in the member. So that was the case with the previous standard. And if we did not have, if we even had one outlier like 120, others 30, 34, if this is not falling within the 15% criteria, then we'll discard this entire result. That was what was given in the earlier code. Now with the latest code, they have said that, of course, those clauses are made. What they have also said that if you don't have any other further sample, then the average of two closest values may be taken as the average result. So this is a new update in the standard. So you can also take the average of two results and discard the outlier. So again, this is a new change in the, but whenever you do have such results which are showing a lot of variation, please check whether your cube molds were in the right shape, had the right flatness, and whether the sampling was done in a proper manner, because that will affect your concrete. Now curing, coming to curing, curing is quite important because without proper hydration, definitely the concrete won't gain the required strength. So this I'm just showing this example because many sites we have come across that sometimes uh, the contractor is asked to put a 150 cube besides a column, and its strength is generally said to be representative of the column in site. This, of course, may be good enough to ensure that the contractor actually cures the column with the same intent as what he is curing the cubes, but it may not really give a what you say similar result if the curing is not really adequate. Now, why? If I have a 1 meter by 1 meter column and just a 0.15 by 0.15 meter cube, a 0.15 by 0.15 meter cube, and if it is exposed to the weather, if the 10 surface of this mold actually or this specimen actually dries because of the heat, of course it will have weaker surface because the concrete or the cement has not hydrated a lot, but that 10 won't matter to a 1 meter column really in terms of percentage, because anyway when we take the course and all that, the surface is anyway cut. So comparing this with a large member is really not a correct replication of the quality of strength or the indication of strength. IS clearly says that whenever you want to check for conformity, IS 516 has to be followed, which basically says that the cubes, when they are casted for the initial 24 hours, they have to be kept at 90% humidity. Then they can be transported, then later demolded and put in curing tank for 27 plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius. Now the latest 516 also says that some people also have a habit of taking the cubes out early in the morning and keeping it drying until the evening and then testing it, which is not a right practice. IS had clearly said earlier that even in the old standard, they had to be tested at SSD. But again, the SSD determination itself is very, very subjective. So now there is new clarity given in latest 516 that any cubes removed from curing tank should be tested within 2 hours of removal from the curing tank. So that makes it clear. So you don't have to keep it in days all to a complete day, keep it in sunlight for an entire day and then test it. This is just a graph which is available in many literatures. This is taken from Concrete Society, where they had done a research of water cured strength against the in situ strength, and typically the strength of in situ concrete was just about 75 to 80%. Now this will probably even be lesser if you are using fly ash or GGBS, because the typical reaction is C3S or C2S, calcium trisilicate or disilicate plus water will give you calcium silicate hydrates plus calcium hydroxide. Now this is the component which reacts with silicates from either the fly ash or the microsilica or condensed silica fume, or even silicates are present in slag as well, or GGBS as well. So if you, this reaction only progresses if you have got sufficient moisture inside the concrete cell. So the reaction is, this is the general reaction. So if you are not curing it properly, though in our literatures we find, or even we say that OPC plus fly ash concrete or OPC plus slag concrete is going to give you much higher 28 day strength. In reality, if you're not giving much attention to curing, this will end up being lower than an OPC plate concrete. So whenever you are choosing the concrete mix design for the economics, make sure that you also pay good enough attention to the concrete in structure, because cubes are always taken care of very, very well, not the structure. This is also an example of how sometimes curing is not paid much attention despite its importance at site. So this is just an example. Sometimes curing with curing compound is also done, because first of all, it gives lot, though the cost of curing compound is higher, we don't have any Indian standards as of now. There are only two codes, ASTM C309, which is a specification for membrane forming curing compound, and C1315, which is a specification for curing compound with some added value addition. So these are the two codes from which we typically check our membrane forming curing compounds. Now in this, curing compounds basically are costly, but they are much better than just wrapping a Hessian cloth around and applying water over it 2 times a day, which is really not very effective curing of concrete members. It also gives you a chance to actually start the work early, because if you're curing a slab with curing compound, probably you may pond it for a few days and then you cannot place any material over it. So the cycle time reduces. Curing compounds are expensive, but probably for a project cost cycle, they may end up cheaper and also give you a much better concrete. We have had done some of comparisons between the in situ strength of concrete or concrete cured with curing compounds and the typical Hessian cloth, and we always found that this to be much better as compared to the typical Hessian cloth wrapping. This is just a study which was done previously uh, when we were actually doing curing concrete compound cubes, and this was just done with pour. I've actually specifically excluded the curing compounds here. And what we did was, we actually were taking samples from manufactured from the plant, and we were casting cubes and curing them in water, and also applying the curing compounds on same samples and testing them and keeping them at room temperature of about 27 plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius without actually immersing in them. None of the cubes were actually exposed to hot sun. They were kept in a standard environment. So this was the typical result. If we consider 100% to be the result of water cured cubes, the average curing compound efficiency was from 78% to 85%. Now there are different compounds available: wax based, acrylic based, or resin based. Nowadays people are also using sodium silicate based hardeners as curing compounds. So they also, though not membrane forming, they will make the surface stiff and sort of give you similar working or similar properties in normal weather conditions. So this is just an example of what we actually observed against a water cured specimen. Now this stripping time amendment has been given in IS 456 Amendment 5, and they have made differences between the OPC concrete and the concrete with PPC. Not much difference for vertical members. It's expected that concrete sets within that much amount of time. Of course, you may need to take care when you have got exceptionally tall columns, taller and wide columns, where the concrete weight, it will be too high. So you need to check with your structural designer at what time they need to be de-shuttered. But for slabs, the cycle is completely different. So this is something which has been given, and this typically for OPC design, this is what is mentioned as what will be the typical strength at a given age. 3 days 45% of specified strength, 7 days 60%, and 14 days you will typically get 85%. Now coming back to equipment, this is where most of the neglect happens, and sometimes this affects your laboratory testing. Molds most unattended to. The standard tolerance for 150 mm size molds is 150 plus or minus 0.2 mm. But we will see also on test reports sometimes that one mold is 152 into 149 and all these sort of things. Imagine your mold not being straight. It is inclined like this. Please excuse my drawing. If the CTM platen is coming into contact with this area first and not uniformly on the 150 by 150 mm size area, then the stress will be higher for the given amount of light and already micro cracks will start appearing. So you may get a cube which will be failing like this because the stress has been applied here. So obviously you will get a incorrect result. So always make sure your cube molds are in right shape and size. Flatness is equally important. I'll just show a small video on flatness. This is a mold, and this is the side where labeling has been done. Means this is the trowel sides. Typically we keep the trowel side on the side while testing. The label will be somewhere here because that is not a machine, or that is not a machined surface like our molds. So this, see the leveling of the cube. See, the cube is rotating on that means it is basically convex. The inner surface of the mold is not flat and it is convex in shape. So imagine whether the load would be applied for the complete 150 by 150 mm area. You'll often see these sort of marks also, which are indicating of how they position the plate while flattening the surface. So a good practice would be to check the flatness. If you have a calibrated surface plate, well and good. If not, at least try to have a surface which is machine flattened and try to see whether your cubes are flat or not. Because if your cubes are not flat, you will often get these sort of defects. If you have a convex surface of the cube, you typically will get a crack similar to what we get in split tensile test. You will get a crack in the center. So this is indicating either your platens are not flat or your cube molds are not flat. This particular cube also has a horizontal crack as such. I'll just zoom this. So this is also having horizontal cracks, are indicating that there is tension on one side and too much compression on one side of the concrete mold. So check your cubes. This cube is about 144 mm in width on this side. So whether it is going to take, whether the stress will be higher or lower, as the area decreases, the stress will be higher. Here also, though it is a spring-loaded platen, probably it will auto-adjust, but still the initial stress will be coming on this portion. So we always dump the cubes after testing. But if we go through IS has always recommended, even from the previous standard, that you should note the type of failure in the cube, whether it is satisfactory or unsatisfactory. So these are satisfactory failures, where because if it is uniformly loaded, there would be compression, and since this side is not confined, there will be uniform breaking of the specimen because of the tension on these sides, and this is the right type of failure. If you get any of these failures, which are very common, particularly for cheaper CTMs even more, and cheaper molds as well. So if you get this type of failures, your loading is not right, and you may end up getting an incorrect result of whatever you are testing. So please look into this as well. A simple carbon test, which is given in some British reference books, can be employed to. We often concentrate on CTM and we only look for calibration. We never check whether the CTM is actually, the platens are completely flat or not. So a simple carbon test would tell you whether your CTM is actually applying load on the entire 150 by 150 mm surface. If it is not, load by area is what we are calculating the stress. So if your area is lesser, the stress will be much higher and the concrete may also crack prematurely, leading to a lower result than normal. So this is an example of a CTM. Top platen is looking different, bottom platen is looking different. Visibly there is no difference, but we can see that the load is not getting applied uniform. This test is very simple. Take a proper dimensioned 150 cube, put two A4 pages, put a carbon paper in between, sandwich the carbon sheet in between, apply seating load, and put this as an assembly in the CTM, apply seating load of about 100 kilonewton, which should be good enough for loading the specimen uniformly, and then observe this whether the impression is uniform. If it is not, your CTM platens are not loading it uniformly, and that would impact the results. Our codes really don't have any have not indicated that this should be conducted, because what really happens when we conduct the calibration, the platen for the proving ring may be just about 40 to 50 in diameter, and that does not cover the entire area of this 150 size cube. So always check this with a carbon test. This is what a good uniformly loading platen should give, and this is what it is showing, that no load is getting applied on this portion. So imagine if your concrete is only getting loaded in one portion or only in this portion. So ultimately the cube failures will indicate in that manner, and you will have variation in the results. Sometimes we also see these mechanical gauge CTMs in use till today. Uh, One thing to be wary of this is the quality of hydraulic oil inside this. If you use very old hydraulic oil, or there is some sort of impurities which are coming, even if the load is getting applied, this hydraulic jack is lifting on this. If this brass pipe gets blocked, it is having very low diameter of about 1 or 2 If this brass pipe gets blocked because of impurity, this gauge will not increase, but your cubes will crush. So always check whether your brass pipe is actually correct or not, because that may be working at the time of calibration, may suddenly stop working when you are testing the cubes after a few months. So the hydraulic oil quality is very important. In older times, you used to have these CTMs, but not anymore. Rate of loading is again a factor. Higher the speed of CTM, higher will be the result. Lower the speed of the CTM, lower will be the result. So that's why ISS standardized to 14 Newton per mm square per minute, which is roughly 5.25 kilonewtons per second for 150 size cubes. So when you're loading your concrete specimen, about 5.25 kilonewtons of load should be applied per second. Now this is again from Concrete Society. They had conducted a study. I think this graph has been, this chart has been shown in many such presentations as well, referred to in many presentations. So this is the true average strength. If you have a sampling error, that can have an impact of about plus or minus 10%. If you are not remixing sample, paste is not uniform and all that, it can have an impact up to minus 15%. Not much of positive impact, particularly if you are having a mix which is flowable or which has got high workability and the paste is going somewhere else. Cube mold, again, it can have up to minus 15% or plus 5%. Compaction is, we have to remove air. If air is there, definitely it will not take the strength. So if incorrect compaction is there, up to minus 20%. Curing temperature, if you cure concrete in much warmer water, then the strength will be higher. If you cure it in colder water, it will be much cooler. I have seen some examples. We had some projects in Gurgaon happening, and we had some from practical experience. We had some experience that our tendons for PT slabs used to actually burst. Silly thing what was being done was that the cubes were kept in winters in 27 plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius in the lab, and once it used to get about 32 33 MPa, people used to start stressing. But as we know, in north, the cold is very high, and since the concrete is exposed to air, it will also not, this is a chemical reaction, so if it is uh, it will be drastically slowed in cooler temperatures. So we cannot take the cube strength as an indication of the in situ strength, particularly in those climates in the early ages. Probably at 28 days, but even to that extent, 28 days strength will also suffer. So always have the right idea of what your environment is, to do any further processing on concrete. Lack of moist curing, if there is no water, strength can decrease up to minus 35%. In SP23, which is the IS handbook on concrete mixes, they have written a clause that the in situ strength in concrete may be 55 to 80%, 85% of the cube strength. However, for acceptance purposes, we take it as 75 to 85%. This for individual core and this for the set of three results. So curing will affect a lot. So you have to pay the same attention to your cubes and same attention to the concrete inside as well. Then comes the faulty cube location. If you are keeping the cube in an incorrect location, then also the results, and test machine also. Test machine can also have an impact of minus 25% and plus 10%. Now, this was all about our standard laboratory testing. What to be done if the cube result fails? Often we ask that often we would go for the core strength, or some contractors would convince the structural designers or the client that we will do the NDT test, and we will, if it is clearing the requirement, then it will be okay. We need not go for a core test, because core test is really a Pandora's box. Anything can come out of it, because only the contractor is knowing what practices have been followed. The ready mix supplier also knows how the concrete is going to be. So before that, I'll just show you a video of a concrete which is being poured into a member. This is a retaining wall. There's a stopper there. So as you can see, there's lot of slurry which has been washed off, or cement paste which has been washed off. Will the concrete there be truly reflective of what it could have been? First of all, probably the concrete which has been supplied is not really right. On top of that, the concrete has been accepted and it is being put in a retaining wall. And with such amount of slurry loss, whether the concrete will be really homogeneous and consistent across the entire section of the wall, definitely no. It probably will have large amounts of honeycombs, and if you want to do any test on that member, it will also indicate incorrect results. So sometimes we often get overboard with the workability requirements, because nowadays, as one of my old general managers in construction company told, when the workers striked off because we objected to some of the practice, he said that we can get too many engineers nowadays, but masons are, or workers are, very difficult to get. So sometimes they often dictate the quality of concrete which is to be used at site, which is a really sad thing, but unfortunately that is the case. So we'll first start about UPV. UPV is actually a test to measure the uniformity and homogeneity of concrete, not the strength of concrete in structure. IS recently, which was revised in 2018, has also said that whenever UPV values, if you take 15, 20, 30 different UPV values, and in some cases those values are lesser, one of the locations the UPV values are lesser by 10% over the average values, then that particular location can be considered for having internal flaws or segregation by poor workmanship. Now, UPV is influenced by a lot of factors, and these factors will affect the test outcome. But predominantly, ultrasonic pulse velocities can indicate your site workmanship, not necessarily how the concrete was supplied or whether the concrete had the right strength or not. Typically, IS also says that if you do the calibrations with the same mixed design, same set of materials, then the accuracy of UPV in predicting the strength can be plus or minus 20%. So if you are trying to use reference documents from some other mix, they may not necessarily work. So UPV typically is used whenever they find honeycombs. We are talking about strength, but I'll just relate to that, because many times UPV values are also shown as an indication of strength. So they are generally used when the honeycombs are quite high. So this is a beam. structural designer may want to confirm whether the in situ concrete is really, or this is superficial, or whether this also has a lot of internal honeycomb. So they will ask to take UPV across different locations on this beam. So that's where UPV comes into play, not necessarily the strength part. Basically, there is a transmitter, there is a structure in between, and the transmitter transmits ultrasonic waves, and the receiver receives them. So the time is displayed in the digital unit, and the distance is measured by physically measuring it across the tapes with a tape or scale, and then the ultrasonic pulse velocity calculated. Depending on the dimensions of the or the frequency, IS has also specified what sort of thicknesses each frequency can be used to. Means what is the minimum thickness on which we can actually test UPV based on the frequency of the transducer. So that is given in IS 516 part 5 section 1. So the names have become longer for these new standards. So factors governed by concrete member. Density of in situ concrete, really important. Denser the concrete, higher will be the UPV. Age of concrete. If the concrete is moist, UPV will be higher. As the concrete matures and hydrates, then also likely density to be higher. But if it is becoming drier, UPV will be slightly lower. More the reinforcement, again UPV will be higher. Less the reinforcement, UPV will be lower. Moisture content, like I earlier said, more of moisture, higher will be the UPV. Micro cracks will be reducing the UPV, and this is what typically we use. Now, thickness of member, depending on the frequency of the transducer, this will also impact the results. So what the code also says is that if you are testing different size specimens, different thickness specimens with same frequency, there may be some variation in the results which may come because of the difference in thicknesses. What the testing process, direct method is the most reliable method for doing the and it is much preferred method for UPV. Surface preparation is equally important. The transducer and receiver have to be in uniform contact with the concrete surface. If the concrete is not level, then your UPV will again be not right. Frequency depending on the thickness of specimen. So this is just an illustration. If you have got a direct path, no obstruction, perfectly dense concrete, the transmitter will directly travel to receiver, and this time by distance will give you the UPV values. If there is some honeycomb, it will take some time. The timing will increase, so velocity will decrease. If there is a crack, the values have to the waves have to go across the crack, and the time will again change. If there is a crack which is continuous, the receiver will not be able to receive, so you will not get any value. So ISS classified this as the UPV value. Anything below 3.75 is considered as doubtful, and you need to go for a higher. You need to go for further testing. So UPV is indication of the in situ homogeneity and consistency of concrete. Then comes rebound hammer, which is often the quick test for indicating the strength of concrete. Now, both of this is an indicative test. The surface hardness of this member will influence this rebound number, and rebound number is correlated to the compressive strength. So factors governed by the concrete member: type of cement, mixed proportions, surface hardness, moisture content. So depending on the rate of hydration, also the UP values would change. Mixed proportions also same manner. Surface hardness, higher the surface hardness, higher will be the result. Lower the surface hardness, lower will be the result. Higher the moisture content, lower will be the result. And lower the moisture content, higher will be the result. Age of concrete, of course, plays an important part. So higher the age, higher will be the strength from curing practices. Now, curing practices will also affect your surface toughness. So that carbonation, higher carbonation will give you higher UPV, higher rebound hammer results. Stiffness of formwork. If your formwork is very, very firm and there is no bulging and proper compaction of concrete happening, then ideally your UPV values at the soffit of the slab, rebound hammer values at the soffit of the slab and the sides of the beam or bottom of the beam should be the same, but that is not the case. So how dense compaction has happened how rigid the formwork was or how stiff the formwork was will also affect your rebound value numbers, and construction practices, of course. So these are what is there in the concrete member. We'll be just concluding in another 10 minutes time. So then factors governed by testing process, calibration of rebound hammer, on what surface it was calibrated, whether this surface is same as that surface, because the interpretation would vary. Typically there is a standard anvil, but also there is an interpretation done on different grades by the testing agency or the laboratory. Application of hammer, whether the application from person to person, also the repeatability changes. Orientation of hammer, whether it is in direction, it is in vertical direction, horizontal direction, whether gravity is influencing or not, all of these things can, and location of test. So all of these influence. What has come recently in the code which has come in 2021 is that you also need to correlate rebound hammer with UPV, and if the strength for grades lesser than M25, rebound hammer is only reliable and to be used if your UPV values are greater than 3.5 for grades M25 and below. If grades are above M25, then your UPV values at least should be 3.75 to make any meaningful interpretation from rebound hammer possible. What it also says, in case the quality of concrete assessed by UPV is doubtful, no assessment of concrete strength shall be made from rebound hammer test. So 3.5 anyway is doubtful, anything about 3.75. So if it is doubtful, then rebound hammer doesn't really give an indication of concrete strength, and it probably should be not be used. It anyway has a plus or minus 25% tolerance in the whatever results you get. So we ultimately come to the core testing. Now it is really a Pandora's box based on how it is cores are being extracted, how they are being capped, and what sort of process really was followed at that particular location in the, or what sort of concrete was there in the member. But this is the ultimate test whenever somebody has to decide on the course of action to be taken on the column member. So course, this is just an example of the wrong way in the core is taken. Imagine a core, because of the play in the drilling machine, this typically has to go straight to extract the core. Imagine this, there is a wobble and the core has been extracted like this. Whenever you are loading this, will the load be applied completely? Actually, you probably will have a crack like this. So in such cases, you should actually discard the core. IS also says that any core which is having surface defects, major surface defects and cracks should also not be used. So this is something which can be corrected at the time of after extraction of core. Then comes capping. Capping is probably something which would drastically influence your concrete results more so, and it is the precise reason that you don't see typically very normal failures or satisfactory failures for cores. Often the crack comes in a diagonal manner or in a different manner, and this is not really looked into that detail, because whenever you are going to a test, whenever you are extracting cores, you are dependent on a third party person to actually test this and uh, give the results, and based on that interpretation only the structural designer is going to suggest any action if the concrete cubes have failed or even the cores have given the result. So first of all, I'll just come to this. There are important factors of capping. Capping should be perfectly flat. Maximum tolerance is plus or minus 0.05 mm. Now how do you check the flatness? Most of the times when you go to a laboratory, they will give you a set angle and they will give you a vernier, which is not indicating the flatness. Most NABL laboratories need to have a calibrated surface plate. Ask them for that, and also ask for feeler gauges to check whether your flatness of cores are there correctly or not. Perpendicularity can be checked. The core should actually completely be matching the angle. If your core is actually like this is bit exaggerated, but if you have this distance, maximum it shall be 0.03 mm perpendicularity. So if this is like this, then definitely the result again will be a crack like this, because this will be a like shear crack, and the results will not be right. So always check whether your cores are completely perpendicular to the capped surfaces, to the loaded surfaces. Then comes the tolerance. In the parallelism, both these surfaces which are to be loaded, how much variation can be there in these? So it is plus or minus 0.6 mm for a 100 mm cube. So accordingly, for nowadays, most of the concrete is reinforcements are pretty congested. So you may not actually be able to extract a 100 mm core. So it has to be proportionally decreased. And straightness. Straightness has to be plus or minus 3% of the core diameter. So this is illustrated in the code very well. Even in now 5 and 6, it has been illustrated very well nicely. So that leaves a lot of ambiguity out of the understanding of how the uh, surfaces should be. This is how the core should fail if loading has been uniform. Just like cube, it should be like a sand clock figure. If the cap surfaces are not right, then you will see these sort of failures, and they will have an impact on your results. Now IS 516 also asks that the laboratory should report the type of failure, but you will not see most of the laboratories which will be actually reporting this, because it is sort of indicating a deficiency in capping. So many will not report what type of failure has occurred in the core, which is very, very important. And we have had some experiences when we had an unfortunate situation of actually extracting the cores, that the laboratories were not at all willing to write on, even when the failure has occurred in this manner, they were unwilling to write what was the mode of failure of the specimens. Now, again, coming back to the interpretation of core strength, there is a long list of corrections which need to be applied to core strength. We are just coming to conclusion. We'll close in about 2-3 minutes time. Typically, all this code is based on a 100 mm diameter core. But because of congested reinforcement, it is very difficult. So sometimes you may have a 65 ID in a diameter core, 63 mm in a diameter core, sometimes a 75 mm in a diameter core. So very first thing is the core compressive strength, which I'll write here as FCR. Then we have to apply a diameter correction. So if your diameter of core is about 70 to 80 mm, you have to multiply this with 1.03. If it is like less than 70 mm, it is to be multiplied by 1.06. Always, there is also a specific thing given that if your core diameter always has to be at least 3 times the maximum size of aggregate. Now, then apply the L by D correction, because slenderness would play a part in the strength. So again, you have to apply L by D correction. So this will first get corrected with this will get corrected with this. Then finally, you will get the corrected core strength. Now this has to be then again made to be equivalent to a cube strength. So this is multiplied by 1.24. So whatever strength you get after all these corrections has to be within 85% of the FCK of concrete. As long as this is there, it is said that the structure is meeting, or the concrete is meeting the requirement of strength. So these many corrections typically are there. Now capping is really, really important. Now what really factors they influence the core results? Age of concrete and the type of concrete, placement, workability, and mix homogeneity. This is very, very important. If in one portion you have got very less paste, it will affect the result. If you've got too much paste also, it will affect the result. So either way, the results may not be really representative of the actual concrete supplied or put in member. Compaction, many times you often see that the compaction is started very, very late, at least after some amount of concrete, or there may be a lot of segregation as well after compaction. Both will affect the correctness of the result. Curing, definitely it will affect location and place of core, extraction of core. Sometimes this also plays an important part. And eject extraction. In the earlier code, it was written that IS 1199 that typically cores should be extracted after 14 days of casting of the specimen. Now, factors influenced by testing method, extraction method, and transportation. The cores need to be protected when they are transportation. We never know whether the cores are getting any micro cracks if they have not been placed properly. Core size will influence. Definitely, higher the diameter of core, better is the likelihood of getting a much consistent result. Preparation of specimen, which includes cutting, capping, all of these things. Parallelness of prepared cores, flatness of prepared, but all of these axis of loading, all of these are the testing methods which influence the result. So this is more about core test. Earlier in the IS in IS 456, it is given or rather that the average equivalent cube strength of the cores is equal to at least 85% of the cube strength of the grade of concrete specified for the corresponding age. This was given. So it could be like interpretation of how much would be this, how much the strength is supposed to be at 50 age, 90 days, 50 days, 90 days, 120 days. But the new code for core testing has actually removed this ambiguity. What it says is, while assessing the strength of concrete based on cores extracted at a later age, no age factor is generally considered except where considered in design. If it has been considered in design, then only it has to be included. Otherwise, it has to be on 28 days alone. So whatever, even if you are testing cores at say 120 days and comparing, you have to compare it with what its characteristic strength should have been at 28 days. So this is almost it. In all, basically, there are a lot of factors affecting the correctness of results. They can be actually removed by using training the personnel and using the right tools and equipment, and as end user also us going through the codes and the codal provisions, because many times we may not really appreciate the detail given in the codes, and we may be misled also in many cases if we don't. So all of these have an impact on the concrete strength, and with that I'll conclude the session today. Please do ask any questions if you have. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for sharing the intriguing and elaborative presentation. Those were indeed the significant points that you have raised in the subject of variability and factors affecting the interpretation of concrete strength. We have been flooded with questions ever since you started with the first slide. So we have approximately 200 plus questions. So starting from the first question, and a very common question. The question is from Mr. Hemant. The question is, are there any acceptable and unacceptable modes of failure of code? Or the another common question is, if the surface of the core is not satisfactory, do we have to go for a new code discarding the defective one? Amit sir, I think you are muted. We can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. There is a specific mode given in the code about the failure of codes we have seen in the earlier picture. If you get any irregular failures, probably it is indicating that the surface preparation was not good, and you may actually reconsider. You first of all, this has to be done. Measuring of these time capping has to be done before testing, so that you can actually correct the capping before it is tested. If the surface has failed incorrectly, probably it's best you go for another specimen. Of course, that will take time, because the incorrectly loaded specimen will give incorrect results, and you may not you should not end up doing subsequent treatment based on the incorrect interpretation of results. So it's better we go, it is given in IS 516 part 4. So one can refer that and actually see it is the figures are illustrated very clearly as to what you should measure and in what tolerances they should be.
Okay, so next question is from Mr. Mahesh. The question is, how core of structure member taking from existing structure, does it affect the strength of structure?
If you are cutting the reinforcement definitely it will likely impact. Otherwise, if it has been checked, the reinforcement location has been checked with profometer or cover meter, and the cores have been extracted in between and filled timely, then probably it will not. It also depends on the number of cores you are taking in that particular structural member. If it's a very large member and one 75 diameter core is not really a significant area for that member, then probably not. If it is a very slender member and you are taking multiple cores very close to each other, then probably it will definitely. But reinforcement should not be cut while actually extracting the cores.
Okay, sir. So next question is from Mr. Vinay. The question is, any standards to predict the quality of concrete just by looking at the cracking behavior patterns?
No, I haven't come across really. But there is a special handbook on by Indian standards printed a long time ago, where it talks about different cracks in building and the possible causes. Probably it is SP20. I am not really remembering the name. I'll just have a look and then let you know. But there is a special handbook which is part of the construction practices group of building standards. So by looking at cracks, we may not see. But yeah, if you typically have a crack, maybe in a PT tendon line through and through, probably it is possible that while stressing, either the tendon profile was not right, so you had got a through and through crack. You may also see, if you see long vertical cracks, probably they are not just simple shrinkage cracks. So you may need to take any structural inputs, maybe mostly parallel to the longer span. If you see compression cracks, of course, again, no code. If you see compression cracks very on columns very close to your beam column junction, that may also indicate that that portion, the strength may not be really there to take the loads of the upper structure. But it is all again subjective. It may be superficial cracks. It may also be cracks due to the loading. So all of these need to be investigated properly.
Okay, sir. Next question is from Mr. Chandrasekhar. The question is, normally 28 days strength of curing compound is always not equal to water cured sample. What should be the acceptance criteria for cubes cured with curing compound?
Yeah. First of all, there is no codal provision which says that you should test cubes cured with curing compound. Even the code ASTM C309, on which there are 3 tests given in the code to accept or reject the curing compound. So they talk about moisture loss, reflectivity, and drying time. And that is done in a standard sample. Nowhere we test the cubes which are to be cured with curing compound. Because if your contract, I'll just give an example. If your client is saying that since you're using curing compound on the structure, you also test the curing compound cubes and then tell me whether it is giving the required result or not. Please speak with him and just have a written document where you ask him what will be the acceptance criteria if a testing is done in a non-standard manner. Because any non-standard test has to be actually, it cannot be compared with a result for a standard test. So this is something which you should ask. Nowhere we should actually test cubes which are cured with curing compound, because that is not a standard method.
Okay, sir. We do have a lot of questions for you, but because we have time constraints, I'm taking the last question from Mr. Dinesh. The question is whether rebound hammer test conducted on a cube can be compared with compressive testing machine results.
Yeah, if you are correlating, suppose if you have a rebound hammer in your organization and you want to use it to test the in situ strengths of concrete or to determine the in situ strength of concrete, what you can do is, before testing the concrete cubes, you should always have large set of results, of course, and you should calibrate yours, because you will be having your own mix design. You can calibrate the rebound number with the corresponding cube strength and draw your own chart for further use. That can be done.
Okay. So thank you so much, sir, for answering all the questions. Quick update on our next webinar on Saturday, 19th June 21st. The webinar is on an enthralling topic, which is on-site evaluation of concrete strength by Capotest by distinguished speaker Ego Palakrishna, who is head of lab and consultancy services at Dr. Fixit Institute of Structural Protection and Rehabilitation at Pidilite Industry Limited, based at Mumbai. Link to register will be provided on your registered mail ID today, along with the participation certificate. Also, I request the participants to please check the handout section on your screens. To the ones who can't see it, it is a page-like icon below the question mark. You can click it to get the ICI forms for membership as well. Moving on, now I'd request Engineer Vipin Chaudhary to please give his closing remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Divyanshi. Let me first of all give me the compliments to Engineer Amit Haridas ji for the wonderful presentation. The topic is very much related to industry and the students, the consultant, the technocrats which are listening to the webinar that will be beneficial with this talk. Definitely RCC is getting very much important in today's scenario. Life and durability of structure is depending on the strength of the concrete and assessing the strength of the concrete, which is very important from the structural design point of view. Uh, the concrete compression is a complex phenomena, and that's depend on the lot of factors influence the behavior of concrete. Engineer Amit has covered all the aspects which are affecting the strength of the concrete, either from starting from the raw material, from the mixing, batching, curing, other factors. He also covered the various tests which are we using for the assessment of the strength of the concrete. That is the routine test, our non-destructive and destructive testing are there. What are the materials which we are using, like the cement, the water, the SCMs we are using for that. And the most important part, I think, that is the concrete quality, because the humidity of the concrete is more important. That is the true reflection of the concrete. And Engineer Amit has well used the IS codes, how they have connected the codes with the day to day. We are the concrete which casting. What are the design parameters are there? Test for the concrete. So well elaborated the IS codes in his talk. So the whole talk is a very much a combination of theoretical aspects along with the practical aspects, which took us into to the sites as well as to the laboratory also. So my big compliment for the wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Now, an announcement for the participants. We will be taking a quick survey in form of polls pertinent to today's webinar and on the webinar series, as your feedback matters to us. So a survey questionnaire will be flashed on your screens just in a minute. Kindly fill your response and click on the submit option on the top right corners after filling. So now I request the organizers to please start the poll. Can we have question 1? So we'll be waiting for a minute for you all to respond. So thank you all for submitting the response for first question. Taking the last question for today. Can we have the question, please? Do remember, after filling your response, click on the submit option that is there on the top right corner. So thank you so much for sharing your feedbacks with us. It's really enthralling, and we are really happy to see the results that 100% of you want to continue this webinar series. Thank you so much for your feedback. So I once again thank you all for sparing few hours of your valuable time. We hope you found this webinar valuable. Thank you. Stay tuned.
अभी तो बजट टाइट है दुबे जी, मैं कोई दूसरा सीमेंट आपको सोचकर बताता हूँ।
पापा गड़बड़ हो गई।
डोंट वरी बेटा, हम फिर से बना लेंगे।
राजीव, कोई दूसरा सीमेंट, आगे चलकर कोई गड़बड़ हो गई तो?
डोंट वरी मम्मा, हम फिर से बना लेंगे, है ना पापा?
अरे ऐसे नहीं होता बेटा, घर थोड़े बार बार बनता है। हाँ दुबे जी, वो सीमेंट सिर्फ अल्ट्राटेक ही लगेगा। हाँ बिल्कुल पक्का।
घर बनता है जिंदगी में सिर्फ एक बार, बनाइए इसे देश के नंबर 1 सीमेंट से।
अभी तो बजट टाइट है।